Hey everyone, this is Mike. Today we are finally talking about Blue Mage, my thoughts on the job itself as well as raiding on Blue Mage, as last week me and my friends finally finished up all of the achievements related to Blue Mage and raiding on the job. So I thought I'd give kind of my thoughts on it, also seeing how in the next patch 5.4 Blue Mage is going to be up to level 70 and then probably also going to be getting some extra achievements surrounding it as well. Now if you don't know what the current Blue Mage achievements are, what you can get for them, basically what you need to do is clear all of the final raid tier bosses, meaning Twintania, Nail Deus Darnus, Bahamut, A4S, which I forgot the name of that boss, I think it's Manipulator, Brute Justice, and then Alexander the Creator, T5, T9, T13, A4, A8, and A12. And once you've cleared all of those in synced, so you can't unsync them, also without echo, not allowed to have echo. You don't need to do minimum item level though, so that's the one thing that you are not limited to. But once you've done all of that, you get a title called True Blue, if I am not mistaken. And then there is also a mount, which is the Marble mount. If you haven't seen it yet, it's in the thumbnail. I'll also put a picture on the screen real quick. That is basically what you can get for it. Now, when Blue Mage first came out, I was not really a big fan of it. I enjoyed leveling it to level 50, but then once I was there, acquiring the skills was something that I did not enjoy. Most of the time when you go back into doing older content, you're gonna be unsyncing it, and that is already a pretty boring concept to me personally, because you just smash the bosses with our current level 80 characters. So we just went through it really quickly. We didn't really get to play Blue Mage at all, really. We didn't really have to adjust to the fights either as a Blue Mage player. And then also the drop rate on getting the abilities was incredibly low. I remember doing about 40 runs of Garuda Extreme, I believe it was, to try and get her skill, and then we finally, well, it took us 50 runs to clear it basically to get that skill. And that was only for half of the party, because the other half of the party was on level 80 jobs or level 70 back then. I don't remember it quite well. Yeah, it should be level 70 because that was before the data center split even. Anyways, going off topic, so you had to do a lot of runs back in the day to try and get your skills, and that was very annoying, especially for people that had already grinded those fights to get, for example, the mounts. Like in this current version of Blue Mage, you can get a skill from Sophia, and Sophia was one of the primals that I had to do almost 99 runs of, so having to do another 50 to try and get her skill is not really something that I would like to do. Now, what they did implement in the current version of Blue Mage is that if you are synced, you are going to be guaranteed to get the skill. Now, I also noticed that you don't need to be synced with other Blue Mages, but usually that's what you're going to be doing if, for example, everybody in the party still needs that skill. So as long as you're synced down and as long as you are alive at the end of the fight, because that's also very important, you need to be alive when the boss dies or the mob dies, you're guaranteed to get that skill as long as the boss or the mob that you are fighting has used said skill. So acquiring your skills, acquiring your abilities is something that is so much easier now than it was before, because there's no RNG attached to it anymore. You kill the mob, as long as it used its ability and you are alive, then you are going to be acquiring said new ability, making it a gigantic quality of life change for acquiring stuff from dungeons, as well as from raids and other extreme trials and that kind of stuff. So definitely enjoying that aspect now, for two reasons. First of all, you're guaranteed to get it, so you don't need to grind it. And second of all, you need to do the fights synced, so you're still going to be kind of doing the fights itself. And you also need to be on Blue Mage and alive at the end of the fight, so you can't really get carried by other players as much as you would before, where you would just be like, okay, let's let some level 80 guys clear this boss for us once it's done the ability. We don't really have to do anything right now. You have to play that fight as a Blue Mage. Of course, you can still be synced down with players on normal jobs, but still, if you're going into a party finder to try and grab a skill for Blue Mage, you're most likely going to do it as 8 Blue Mages. When it comes down to the raids though, that is where everybody needs to be on Blue Mage. And at first I wasn't a very big fan of how it all works. You need like a ethereal mimicry is what it is called, which will basically give you roles. So you have the DPS role, the healer role, and the tank role, and depending on which role that you choose, your abilities are going to do different things. Like, well, not necessarily abilities, but you're gonna have different stats. So your tanks would have more defensive stats, your healers had increased potency on their healing abilities, I believe, and your DPSs would just deal more damage. But when it came down to those things, you would still, if for example you're playing a tank, need to use Diamondback for pretty much any tank buster that was out there, because you just still wouldn't be able to survive the tank busters that were there. So even though that the mimicries are a good start, you still had to like go and find people and such, it didn't increase your HP or anything like that. It also didn't change some abilities, for example, when it came down to the tanking aspect, because I ended up playing off tank for my group. your tank stance as well as your provoke are both GCDs, and they both have a cost bar. So if the main tank was to die, I technically need 2 GCDs in order to take over the boss from him, instead of just pressing off global cooldown provoke like I would have on some other, like on a normal boss fight. So there are still some things that I would like to see changed, considering some of the systems surrounding Blue Mage and how it functions. For example, healers could definitely do with some extra healing or shielding abilities as well. Diamondback is kind of fun to like cheese mechanics with and that kind of stuff, but still, whenever I play a tank, I feel like I should just be able to use a defensive cooldown instead of just T-pose for 5 or 10 seconds, however long Diamondback ends up lasting. So there are still a couple of things I would like to see changed, but overall I did have a pretty good experience doing it on Blue Mage, because you have to come up with some new ideas on how to handle stuff. You need to learn the timings for the Diamondbacks, for example on Alexander Prime, when I am tanking one of the adds during the add phase. I could basically time my Diamondback so that I would cover 2 of the tank busters, then I could do some damage in between, and then I could basically start T-posing again for the next 2 tank busters. So it was pretty fun to figure out those kinds of timings, because it is pretty satisfying to basically be able to cover both of those tank busters, because your timing needs to be really on point for that. If you miss it a little bit, probably going to get smacked in the face and die. Now on the other hand, you also have the mechanics that are going to be very different on Blue Mage as well, because back in the day, or just on any fight normally right now, you are usually going to be getting mechanics depending on role. That's just how Final Fantasy XIV works. Whenever you're looking to figure out mechanics, always look at what role gets what, who gets paired with whom, because usually there is a role division when it comes down to how mechanics will work. And Blue Mage is not gonna have that, because you're technically playing as 8 DPSs. So back in the day, for example, let's take Alexander again as an example. You would have your tanks getting specific mechanics, your healers would get specific mechanics during the time stops, and then your DPS also had specific mechanics. So usually you would only be thinking of 1 or 2 mechanics. For example, as a DPS on the first time stop, you would either get the purple debuff, which is the defamation, or you would get nothing, I believe, which would then mean that you would share your shared sentence, well, the shared sentence of the healer, if I'm remembering that correctly. But if you're doing an all Blue Mage, you don't have those things anymore. You could get the defamation, you could get nothing, you could get a shared sentence, you could get close tether, you could get far tether. Like, all of those mechanics are now things that you have to think about, and that basically goes through to the rest of the fights as well. When it comes down to the Inception phase of Alexander the Creator, you again need to adjust to all of those things. For example, Brute Justice towards the end of the fight as well with Gavel. Everybody needs to know their mechanics as well. Although with Gavel, apparently if you stick with the same group, the fight is going to divide you into a healer, a tank, and a DPS role. So healers and tanks are going to be mixed, and DPSs are also going to be together. So apparently that does stay fixed. But when it came down to Alexander the Creator, I've had every mechanic basically when it came down to the time stops, and that means that you need to adjust a little bit more. Also means that there's a lot more communication required from your team. Because all of a sudden places aren't really going to be predetermined, and instead of you going to 1 out of 4 places, you could be going to 1 out of 8 places, or out of 7, I don't know how the math ends up, doesn't really matter. But basically you can't really make a priority system anymore. You need to adjust to each other, you need to call out your stuff. Which communication during raiding is something that I really enjoy personally, which is one of the big reasons why I enjoy Destiny 2 raids so much, as they're a whole lot more about communicating with your team rather than go stand in X position if you get X mechanic. And I feel like with Blue Mage that was a little bit more the case as well. So I personally definitely really enjoyed doing these Blue Mage raids, had a lot of fun going through them with my friends, and I'm actually looking forward to going to level 70 now with my Blue Mage and maybe doing some of the new content from Stormblood as well. I'm definitely hoping that there's going to be a new achievement so that I can go in there again, get a new title, get a new mount, and get some new skills as well, because with the way that Blue Mage functions right now, with the skills being really easily acquired, I definitely don't mind going into a dungeon, running it once with 3 of my friends, or maybe with some people that I picked up from Party Finder, to basically go get that skill. Some of the skills also look really cool as well, so I definitely don't mind going after some of those skills, and then basically once you have acquired your skill set, it's definitely a lot of fun to go into those raids as well, figuring out some new ways to do mechanics, whether or not you're cheesing it through using Diamondback, or if you're trying to come up with some other strat, because now all of a sudden all 8 players need to know all of the mechanics instead of just you knowing the things that your role has, which would be either DPS, healer or tank, which is definitely my personal favorite aspect of raiding on Blue Mage. Again, just a lot of quality of life things that they could do, like for example more healing tools, more mitigative tools for tanks, or for example also like having provoke of an off global cooldown together with your tank stance. Something like that could definitely be improved. But then again, if we're getting new skills going all the way up to level 70, we could see those kind of things happening as well. But we'll have to wait and see about that. So far, I've had a good time with Blue Mage. Let me know in the comments down below whether or not you've been enjoying it as well. Maybe this can also serve as some kind of motivation for you to try and get it to level 60 before the changes happen to level 70. Or maybe if you're done with doing all of the content and, for example, tomorrow the relic weapon is going to come out, but maybe you're done with the relic in like a week or two, then you still have a lot of time before 5.4 to maybe go and get this achievement done as well. I can definitely recommend people to go and get it, because it has been a lot of fun for me personally. But that's all I wanted to talk about. I want to thank you for watching. I want to thank my Patreons for supporting me, and I'll see you in another one.